my pleasure to send us off for the last speech of the evening. I've been asked by my colleagues to give a rousing speech on the court's remote participation bill. I'm not sure that the subject matter really lends itself. I am taking my full 10 minutes, and I will be back on the first sitting day to take my extra 2. This bill, I think, is an interesting advancement in the way that our criminal justice system operates at a practical level, and one at which I think we're playing a little bit of catch-up with some of our overseas jurisdictions, but I'll touch on that a little later on. I think it's important to note that already in New Zealand we have the ability to use audiovisual links and audiovisual technology, but it's primarily isolated to situations where it's deemed appropriate for the benefit, as I understand it, for witnesses. But this bill gives provision for that technology to be used much more widely. And Labour does support this bill in its form, but we do want to issue some areas of caution that we wish to be discussed further in select committee, because at the moment there are some very open presumptions in the bill that we think it would be wise to test and discuss in greater detail. Just to give an overview of the legislation, perhaps for David Grant, I'll just highlight we do support this bill, but I think it's wise to raise the issues that we have some ongoing concern with. The bill, as it sits currently, sets out some areas of criteria for consideration. It is reasonably flexible in that it says that there is a presumption in favour of the use of AVL in criminal procedural matters. And so primarily, obviously, the government's aim here is to use AVL in areas where no evidence is being presented, and I think it's quite obvious why that situation might be the case. Where evidence is presented, it's difficult for someone to get a full grasp of what's being presented in the court. If they are on a video link, they don't have a full view of the court and various matters going on within that court. I think that criteria makes sense. It allows for the use of AVL in criminal substantive matters where evidence is being presented, and I want to just reflect on that a little later on, and allows for the use of AVL in civil matters where the party's consent is given. The commentary on the bill points out that this legislation is one of the first steps to be taken in the reform of criminal justice procedure. And I just want to reflect on the fact that this piece of legislation, in conjunction with the Judicial Matters Bill that we've just debated earlier on, does in a very piecemeal way talk about reforms in the criminal justice system. And I do think it would be useful, given that various ministers in the Cabinet have talked about the need for criminal justice reform, that perhaps the government would be wise to deliver some vision as to what that looks like, because at the moment we tend to be dealing with that in a very piecemeal, incoherent way, and I think it would be useful for this House to understand the wider context that the government, the wider vision that the government has for this area, and what eventually what kind of major reforms it intends to make. That would be a useful thing for them to do. I guess I just leave that challenge with government members. I do want to reflect on the regulatory impact statement provided with this bill. It's fast becoming one of my favourite areas of debate when we come to a bill, because often there's such a hodgepodge mix of sometimes scant detail right through to no detail or even a regulatory impact statement at all. But this one does have a few key elements out, but without any real information. And I think I continue to be baffled as to why we have a full Minister for Regulatory Reform, and yet we're unable at the most basic level to fulfil regulatory impact statements. That would be the Honourable Rodney Hyde, who has seen himself through quite a few bills that have had absolutely no decent regulatory impact statements. And the most important part of this probably is the cost of current arrangements, the part of the RIS that sets out where the savings will be realised. Because I think ultimately, if you ask anyone, why are we using AVL technology, people would assume that it's probably because it's going to save us some cash. Either we're not going to be transporting prisoners around between court for short procedural matters or the like. So you might assume that that would be the core reason for the bill. If that is the case, you would assume the government would know how much we were saving. and yet I see no evidence of that in this piece of legislation. In fact, the bill itself says, under the heading of cost of current, having all court participants physically present involves financial and other costs. Cost to witness, the cost of transporting prisoners, and it finally says the expected growth in prisons on remand, creating a flow-on demand for court and appearances. I wonder secretly if there, in the third bullet point, is the real reason for this bill. There are just too many people to ship around at the moment, and if we are going to start using vans as prisons, because we use containers, so why would we not use vans as prisons? It would be easier if we just whopped some video links in the back of the van, and there you have it. We could do everything from the one spot, house them, trial them, everything in a one-stop shop for criminal justice. But the reason I raise this point is because the UK, when I was a member of staff seconded to the Home Office for a short piece of work which looked at bureaucracy in the criminal justice system and areas where we might make savings, they were trialling a thing called virtual courts. And in a review of policing that I was a part of at that time, they looked into the impact of virtual courts. Virtual courts in the UK were a first hearing held in the magistrate court in which the defendant appears in the court by means of a video link from the police station, and for which the documents required are electronically stored and shared between the agencies involved. 2 points there. They found, after setting up virtual courts, that actually the cost savings they thought would appear were not actually realised. The cost of setting up the AVLs, of using them, and they weren't often used as adequately as they could have been, because sometimes the judiciary did not wish to use them, and that's something that this bill would still allow. As far as I read it, the judiciary could use its own flexibility in whether or not it picks it up. But also, the electronic sharing of information was where some of the cost savings would be realised. So unless we start moving further down that track, we may not see the full benefit of AVL. I think the wider point, though, is that if we are going to use this technology, we do need to be cautious that we use it in an appropriate way and we do not undermine the right of an individual defendant to have a full hearing in front of a court if that is what that particular case may require. And if that particular case requires, for instance, evidence to be heard in the flesh. I see my time is about to expire, but I do have to
remember, it's very perceptive because the time has expired. So this debate is interrupted and the bill is set down for resumption next